I washed every dish on that table with shaking hands. Not from age, not from weakness, but from humiliation. The words she'd thrown at me still clung to the air like the greasy smell of turkey fat. "You're basically the family maid anyway, aren't you, Margaret?" She laughed when she said it. Laughed, and not a soul spoke up for me. I was invisible. At least, until he arrived. The door hadn't even shut behind my grandson Jeremy when the hush fell. His sudden presence sucked the noise from the room like a vacuum. He wasn't supposed to come. He hadn't been at Thanksgiving in 3 years, not since his father, my son, passed. But there he was, taller than I remembered, in a charcoal suit and holding a stiff folder of papers in his hand. His gaze swept the dining room like a searchlight, but it landed gently on me. And he smiled. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. Not because of the food, though I loved cooking. Not because of the family, though I cherished my blood. But because it reminded me of the simple grace of service, of quietly caring for those you love. I never asked for thanks. Not when I woke up at 4:30 a.m. to prep the turkey. Not when I ironed linens that no one noticed. Not even when I cleared everyone's plates while they lounged on the couch, scrolling through their phones or chatting like I wasn't there. But this year, something had shifted. Maybe it was the way Denise, my daughter-in-law, had begun assigning me chores instead of asking for help. Maybe it was how the other grandchildren, following her cue, stopped calling me grandma and started calling me Margaret. Or maybe it was just that I was tired. But nothing could have prepared me for what she said when I walked in from the kitchen carrying the last pie. "She's got it," Denise had said, waving me off as I reached for an empty glass someone had left on the floor. "Margaret's basically the family maid anyway, aren't you?" The room had gone quiet for a beat, then laughter, muffled, like someone trying not to choke on it. I smiled, brittle and tight. My knees ached from standing all day. My pride ached more. I said nothing. I just kept clearing. That was the moment Jeremy walked in. "Grandma," he said. "Not Margaret. Not like the others." His voice cracked something inside me. I turned. "Jeremy," I whispered, hands still wrapped around a casserole dish. He crossed the room without hesitation, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "I've been looking for you," he said quietly. "I couldn't reach you. Mom kept saying you were busy or out." My hands trembled. "She screens my calls now," I replied, my voice low. "I figured maybe you moved on." Jeremy's eyes flickered to his mother, standing frozen by the sideboard with a wine glass halfway to her lips. "She told me you didn't want visitors," he said. Silence fell again, sharper this time. Denise opened her mouth, but Jeremy turned to the room. "I brought something," he said, lifting the folder in his hands. Denise stepped forward. "Jeremy, this is not the time for." "This is exactly the time," he interrupted, setting the folder on the table. "You all made it clear this house doesn't belong to Grandma anymore. You made her the help. That ends today." He opened the folder. "Let me back up. 3 years ago, when my son Michael passed Jeremy's father, he left behind a will. A complicated one, full of emotional knots and legal caveats. But one thing was clear, the house was meant for me. Michael had written it plainly. To my mother, Margaret, and, for as long as she wishes to live in it. She is to be cared for, respected, and honored in the home she built. But Denise, well, she had her own ideas. She moved in to help me. Said she couldn't afford rent in the city anymore, and I didn't argue. She brought her kids, their dog, and boxes of things that soon outnumbered my own. What was once my home became hers. My rocking chair was shoved into the garage to make room for her Pinterest-perfect decor. My quiet evenings were filled with TV shows I didn't choose. I was relocated from homeowner to housekeeper. I cooked. I cleaned. I stayed out of the way. And worst of all, I thought I deserved it. Jeremy hadn't forgotten, though. He'd taken a break from college after his father's death, gone back later, graduated early. He had a job now, something in law. I didn't understand it all, but I knew from the way he carried himself that he hadn't come here just for pie. "These are legal papers," he said, sliding copies across the table. "Probate confirmation. I hired someone to help me sort through Dad's old records. I wanted to make sure his intentions were honored." He paused, scanning the room. No one spoke. "He left everything to Grandma. The house, the land, the savings. Everything. There's a clause that says if she's mistreated, the trust can intervene." My heart thudded. Denise's face drained of color. "You're bluffing. That clause doesn't exist." "I thought you'd say that," Jeremy replied, cool and calm. That's why I had it notarized. He looked at me. You don't have to stay here, Grandma. Not like this. But if you do want to stay, no one, and I mean no one, is going to treat you like a maid ever again. I couldn't speak. My throat closed around the words. All I'd wanted was to feel like part of my family again. Not worshipped, just seen. Jeremy walked over, gently taking the dish from my hands. You've done enough, Grandma, he said. Let us take care of you now. For the first time in years, I let someone else clean the kitchen. And it sparkled. Jeremy's presence, like a gust of wind in a stagnant room, stirred more than just shock, it unearthed guilt. Not just in Denise's eyes, but in the tight-lipped expressions around the table. My other grandchildren looked down at their plates. No one dared meet my eyes. I didn't mean it that way, Denise muttered finally, her voice brittle as fine china. It was just a joke. A joke you've made every holiday for the past 3 years, Jeremy said, turning to her. But jokes have weight, especially when no one's laughing. She straightened up, glassy-eyed. I took care of her. I paid bills. I made sure this house stayed running. Jeremy raised an eyebrow. You used her pension to cover your debts. You had her sign checks she didn't understand. You even blocked her bank access last winter. I gasped. How do you know that? He turned to me, gently. Because I subpoenaed the financial records. Denise's face turned a violent shade of red. You're trying to ruin me. No, he said calmly. You did that yourself. I'm just holding up the mirror. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful, it was thick with tension. The twins, Denise's youngest, pushed their plates away. Someone cleared their throat, a cousin maybe. I wasn't looking at them anymore. My eyes were on Jeremy. He had grown. Not just taller, broader, but older in the eyes. Wiser. I didn't know what to do, I said softly. After your father died, I didn't want to fight. He always said family came first. Jeremy nodded. That's what they count on. Your silence. Your grace. A tear slipped down my cheek. I hadn't cried in front of them in years. I'd swallowed my grief, folded it into pie crusts, ironed it into linens. But now it came out in a trickle and then a flood. He wrapped his arms around me. You're not alone anymore. After dinner, Jeremy insisted on helping me upstairs. I'd been sleeping in the guest room for over a year, my old master bedroom, now occupied by Denise. I hadn't protested. I told myself it didn't matter where I slept. But walking through the hallway now, past the boxes piled against walls, I felt the deep wrong of it. This used to be yours, Jeremy said as we passed my old sewing nook. Every inch of this place bears your touch. I nodded. It doesn't feel like mine anymore. He stopped. It will. When we reached my room, I sat on the edge of the twin bed and looked around. The wallpaper was peeling slightly in the corner. My old photo albums were stacked in a dusty pile by the closet. No one ever came in here but me. Jeremy glanced around. You're moving back into the master suite tomorrow. I gave a weak smile. She'll never allow it. She doesn't get to allow anything, he said simply. You own this home. She's a guest. A very temporary one. The firmness in his voice startled me. I don't want to be cruel, I said. No, he agreed, kneeling beside me. But you deserve to stop being kind to people who treat your kindness like weakness. The next morning, everything changed. Jeremy arrived early, not in a suit this time, but in jeans and a flannel. He brought movers. You're having me evicted? Denise screamed from the front steps as 2 men began boxing up her decorative pillows and essential oils. You have 48 hours to vacate, Jeremy replied, handing her a copy of the legal order. Plenty of time. I have kids. They're not being thrown out, he said. You're just being told the truth. This is not your house. Her voice cracked. You're destroying our family. He looked her in the eye. No, Denise. You destroyed it when you turned my grandmother into your maid. I stayed inside while it all happened. I watched from the kitchen window, sipping warm tea, hands still trembling, but not from humiliation anymore. From adrenaline. From disbelief. From the strange, unfamiliar lightness of being defended. It was surreal. Neighbors peeked over fences. Some pretended not to notice. But by dusk, the front lawn was clear. Her car gone. Her name no longer clinging to the air. And for the first time in 3 years, I walked into my master bedroom and shut the door behind me. The days that followed were quiet, peaceful. I slept in my old bed. I opened windows and let fresh air in. Jeremy stayed for a week, helping me clean, repaint, donate what no longer sparked joy. Marie Kondo would have been proud. We found my wedding china in the attic. We found my husband's army letters. We found me. One afternoon, I sat Jeremy down on the porch swing. Why did you come back? I asked. He looked out over the yard. Because I remembered who you were when no one else did. You tucked me in when I had nightmares. You sat with me for hours after Dad died. You were the one constant. I didn't think you remembered. I did. And I remembered what Dad said in the hospital. The last thing he whispered to me. Take care of Grandma. She took care of everyone else. I closed my eyes. The tears came easier now. Not from sorrow. From healing. But not everyone stayed quiet forever. A week later, my phone rang. A number I knew too well. Mom, Denise's voice said. Please. I don't have anywhere to go. I hesitated. My old self wanted to say yes. To offer comfort. To open doors, bake cookies, pretend the past never happened. But that Margaret was gone. You can apply to the trust, I said. It has emergency funds. Jeremy can give you the paperwork. Silence. So you're really cutting me off. I'm offering the same kindness I'd give to any stranger, I replied. You chose to become one. And I hung up. Jeremy told me later that the trust received her application. He didn't tell me if they approved it. I didn't ask. I had flowers to plant, bread to bake, a porch to repaint, a life to reclaim. And when Thanksgiving came again, I set the table not for them, but for those who had never made me feel invisible. Jeremy carved the turkey. His fiancée brought dessert. And when someone tried to clear the table, I smiled and said, leave it. I'll get it later. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. The winter after Denise moved out was the first season in years that didn't feel cold. Not because of the weather, the snow still fell heavy, blanketing the yard and frosting the windows. But inside the house, warmth returned. The silence that used to press down on me like a weight became peaceful, sacred. Every creak of the floorboard, every kettle whistle, every click of the old clock was mine again. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Jeremy visited every Sunday without fail. Sometimes with his fiancée, Elena, a soft-spoken, brilliant woman who brought books instead of wine. Other times, just him and me. We talked for hours not about Denise, not even about the past. Just about music, his job, what flowers would do best in spring. He helped me set up email again. Made me an Instagram account, even though I still didn't fully understand it. He posted a photo of me in the garden, gloves covered in dirt, smiling. It went viral. This is my grandma. She lost everything, then quietly reclaimed it without bitterness. She taught me that grace is power and silence isn't surrender. It had over 200,000 likes. Suddenly, I was flooded with messages. Strangers, young women, older men, people from across the world sent stories. About being dismissed. About being used. About rebuilding. I cried reading them. Jeremy printed the most beautiful ones and turned them into a scrapbook. On the cover, letters to Margaret. One day in February, while snow still dusted the garden beds, I got a letter. Not an email. A real letter. From Denise. Dear Margaret, I know I don't deserve your time. I wouldn't blame you if you burned this without reading it. But I needed to try. I was angry for a long time. Not just at you, at the world. After Michael died, I felt like everything was slipping away. I clung to the house, to the routine, because it was the last thing that made me feel like I still belonged somewhere. But I became cruel. I see that now. I made you small to make myself feel bigger. And you, in your grace, never fought back even though you had every right to. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm just saying thank you. For everything you gave me. For every meal, every bedtime story, every silent sacrifice I didn't deserve. I'm rebuilding now, in a studio apartment across town. I've taken a job at a local bookstore. I've started therapy. And I talk about you in every session. I'm trying to become someone you'd be proud of. Love, Denise. I read it 3 times. Then I set it down and stared out the window at the frozen bird bath. I didn't know what I felt. Closure? Maybe. Sadness? A little. But mostly peace. She wasn't asking for a second chance, she was taking responsibility. That meant something. I wrote back. Dear Denise, thank you for your honesty. I once read that when someone breaks your heart, it doesn't heal in the same shape, it heals differently, stronger, but never quite the same. That's how I feel. I wish you healing. I truly do. And I hope, one day, you find your own kind of Thanksgiving. Take care. Margaret. In March, the snow finally melted. Jeremy, and I tilled the garden beds again. We planted tulips and rosemary. I hadn't done that since Michael died. He found me one morning in the shed, holding a faded photo of my husband, the one in uniform, the one he sent me from Vietnam with a coffee-stained note on the back. "I'll build you a home when I return." Jeremy looked over my shoulder. "He did, Grandma. And you've protected it all these years." I nodded, but I forgot it belonged to me. That spring, I started writing again. Little essays, reflections. Jeremy encouraged me to share them, so I did online at first. Then one day, I got an email from a small publishing house. They wanted to publish my story. I laughed. I thought it was a scam, but it wasn't. They offered to compile my essays, parts of my life, and Jeremy's posts into a small memoir, something for women like me. Women who got quiet, who got tired, who forgot they were powerful until life reminded them. The title? The Family Maid, and Other Lies I Believed About Myself. The book released in the fall, not in bookstores everywhere, but enough. I had never been to a book signing, let alone held one. But there I was, sitting at a table with a pen in my hand, shaking, as actual readers lined up to meet me. A woman hugged me. She had graying hair and tears in her eyes. "You gave me the courage to leave my daughter's house," she whispered. She wasn't cruel, but I was invisible. "You reminded me I deserved to be seen." I cried with her. We all did. That Thanksgiving, the table was full not of the people who used to be there, but of new faces. Jeremy, Elena, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Kim, who brought homemade kimchi. A single mother and her teenage son from the shelter I started volunteering at. 2 young women from my memoir writing workshop. Even Denise's oldest, my grandson Marcus, showed up unexpectedly, now in college and apologetic, with a bottle of wine and a letter folded in his jacket pocket. It wasn't the same family, but it was mine. And when the turkey was carved and plates were passed, I stood up, raised a glass, and said, "I used to think grace meant staying quiet, but grace also means knowing when to speak." They clinked glasses with me, and I finally felt full. That winter, I also started doing something I hadn't done since I was a young girl, writing letters to myself. They weren't journals. I'd always found journals to be too quiet, too introspective. These were different. These were letters to the parts of me I had silenced for decades. The girl who danced barefoot in the kitchen, the young bride who waited by the window, the new mother who watched her baby sleep, the widow who tried to hold a family together with pot roast and politeness. Sometimes, the letters were full of grief. Other times, full of defiance. But always, they were honest. One night in April, Jeremy found me sitting on the back porch, scribbling by candlelight. "You're writing again," he said. "I'm remembering again," I corrected. He sat beside me. "What do you remember tonight?" I smiled. "The first time I was called a maid, I was 8 years old. A neighbor boy said it when I swept my grandmother's porch. I laughed at the time, thought he was just teasing." Jeremy leaned back in the chair. "Funny how those small things stick." "They do," I said, "but I'm unsticking them, one by one." May brought a flood of small joys. The birds returned to the yard, their songs replacing the television noise I used to endure. The air smelled of lilac again. I started waking earlier, not out of duty, but because I wanted to watch the sunrise with a hot cup of tea. And for the first time in years, people began visiting because of who I was, not what I could do for them. One afternoon, I hosted what Jeremy jokingly called a liberation brunch. It was a table of women, all older, all worn, all once dismissed. Martha had left her son's house after being assigned laundry duty for 3 years straight. Lillian had just finalized her divorce from a man who never struck her, but who erased her day by day. Han, a Vietnamese widow, had moved in with a friend after her niece told her she was too much trouble. We laughed. We cried. We passed warm scones. We said the names of women we used to be and the women we were becoming. At one point, Lillian stood up, glass of orange juice in hand. "To Margaret," she said, voice firm. "The woman who reminded us we are not caretakers by default. We are whole people, with stories worth telling." I laughed, then cried, then stood up and toasted them all back. It was also in May that I saw Denise again. Not at my house, at the bookstore where she worked. I hadn't meant to run into her. I was there for a poetry reading. Elena had suggested I read something I'd written. I almost said no, but something inside me, something old and brave, told me to say yes. I was waiting in line for tea when I saw her behind the counter, her hair tied back, cardigan sleeves rolled, face thinner than I remembered. She saw me too. For a moment, we froze. Then she looked down, handed the customer in front of me their change, and without lifting her eyes, said, "Next." I stepped forward. She looked up. We stared at each other, the kind of long, weighted look that holds years inside it. Then she said quietly, "You look good, Margaret." "So do you," I replied. Silence. Then, carefully, she asked, "Are you here to read?" I nodded. She blinked quickly, as if swallowing something. "I'll stay," she said. "If that's okay." "It is." The reading was small. 20 people, maybe. A dim corner of the store. Folding chairs. The kind of crowd that holds space gently. When it was my turn, I stood and unfolded the page I'd printed hours before, a letter I hadn't planned to read, but one I knew I needed to. To the woman I used to be. You bent for them. You cooked. You folded. You shrunk. You waited for them to notice you, and when they didn't, you blamed yourself. But you were always enough. Always. You were never just the help. You were the heart. You were the roof that held the house up. You were the story no one told, the warmth no one named. But you were never invisible. They just refused to see. You see her now. Don't look away again. When I finished, I looked up and saw Denise's eyes red, but shining. She clapped. Gently. Honestly. And that was enough. In June, Jeremy asked if he could record me for a podcast. About what? I asked. About legacy, he said, and reclaiming it. I laughed. You think people want to hear a 78-year-old woman talk about regret and roast chicken? I think they need to. So I agreed. We sat in the living room with microphones and tea. He asked questions I hadn't heard aloud in years. What was the hardest part of starting over? Believing I was allowed to. What would you say to your younger self, back when you first felt small? I'd say, your quietness is not weakness, but it is not your only option. Speak. The episode aired in July. It reached over 1.2 million listeners. And that week, I received a letter from a woman in Nebraska who said she'd packed her bags after hearing my story, left her adult son's house, where she'd been just the babysitter for 5 years. She ended her letter with, "Thank you, Margaret, for reminding me I'm a person, not a placeholder." By August, the house felt alive again. Not with chaos, but with chosen family. We had weekly dinners. The garden bloomed. I started hosting memoir circles in the living room. We had rules. No interrupting. No justs. No apologizing for crying. One evening, Marcus, Denise's eldest, brought a friend. A soft-eyed boy named Adam. They weren't official, but it was clear. After dinner, Marcus pulled me aside. "Grandma," he said, "thank you for letting me come back. I know I stood by before. I was scared. You were young," I said, touching his cheek. "But now you're choosing better." He nodded. "I want to be better." I believed him. And then, just before the leaves turned, just before the air hinted at fall again, I received one final message. Not from a stranger. From Jeremy. Handwritten. On paper. "Grandma, you are the beginning of every good thing in my life. Thank you for teaching me that dignity is not quiet compliance, it's knowing when to reclaim your place. Because of you, I know what strength looks like. Because of you, I will teach my children how to love their elders. You didn't just survive. You taught us how to rise. Forever proud. Jeremy." I pressed the letter to my heart. Then I went to the kitchen, turned on the oven, and started baking. Because Thanksgiving was coming. And this time, the table would be set for me not because I belonged in the kitchen, but because I belonged at the head of the table. Thanksgiving came again full circle. But this year, the house looked different. Not just physically, though Jeremy had helped me repaint the shutters and replace the carpet in the hallway. Not just in decor, though Elena had insisted on helping me pick out a new dining set that didn't sag and creak. It looked different because the air inside it had changed. Gone was the sense of obligation, of quiet servitude, of being someone else's convenience. In its place, joy, intention, a table filled not with people who shared my blood, but those who honored my spirit. The day began with sunlight. Jeremy arrived early to help in the kitchen, not because he expected me to cook everything, but because he knew I loved the rhythm of it. The chopping, the simmering, the scent of cinnamon and sage filling the rooms like memory made visible. "I thought I'd take over pie duty," he said. "You? Bake," I teased. "I've been practicing," he grinned. "Elena made me learn. I still burn the crust, but I make up for it in whipped cream." I'll supervise, I smiled. From a chair. Good, he said. Because you're not lifting a finger today unless you want to. By noon, the house was filled with laughter. Mrs. Kim brought over rice cakes and roasted vegetables. The twins from the shelter I'd mentored came with store-bought brownies and shy smiles. Lillian, who'd recently moved into her own little one-bedroom after leaving an ungrateful nephew's basement, brought a cranberry sauce so tart it nearly knocked Jeremy over. And then as guests poured in, setting dishes down, hugging, uncoiling scarves, someone I hadn't expected walked through the door. Denise. She stood there awkwardly in the doorway, holding a pie in a foil dish. The room went silent for a beat. Jeremy looked up, blinking. I met her eyes and nodded. Come in, I said. If you're here with respect. She exhaled, relieved. I am. She didn't sit at the head of the table. She didn't talk over anyone. She didn't bring up the past. Instead, she helped pass the mashed potatoes and asked after people's children. She complimented the cranberry tart and said Jeremy's pie crust was surprisingly passable. It wasn't perfect, but healing rarely is. After the meal, I stood. Every year before, I would collect plates quietly, often before dessert even hit the table. I used to think it was kindness that if I worked hard enough, maybe someone would notice. Now I knew better. Now, I didn't clean unless I wanted to. And this time, I had something else to do first. I cleared my throat. Before we put away the dishes, I said, I'd like to say something. The room stilled. I looked around. At the people who had become my second family. At the granddaughter of Mrs. Kim who'd helped me weed the garden last week. At Marcus, standing next to Adam, beaming with shy pride. At Jeremy, who sat with his elbows on the table, looking at me like I hung the stars. And then, at Denise. Eyes down, but listening. I spent most of my life believing that love was best shown in silence. I began. In sacrifice. In swallowing pain so others wouldn't feel awkward. In letting people pile their needs on top of mine. I paused. But I've learned something in the past year. Love isn't silent. Love speaks. Love draws lines. Love knows when to say, this is my limit. This is my worth. This is my home. I took a breath. This house was built with love. My husband promised me that. But I kept it standing with my own two hands. And for a while, I forgot that. I let others forget that too. I looked at Jeremy. And then someone reminded me. He smiled. I continued. So today, I'm not just grateful for the food or the company. I'm grateful for clarity. For the chance to reclaim what I should never have given away. My voice. My space. My story. Silence fell. Then applause. Real, unprompted, echoing around the room like wind through autumn leaves. And for the first time perhaps ever I truly felt seen. That night, after everyone left, Jeremy stayed to help tidy. Not because I needed him to, but because it was something we did now. Side by side. Not out of duty, but companionship. As he scraped the last of the pie into a container, he looked at me. You've changed the world, Grandma, he said. I laughed. It's a small house. Not to the people who needed to see what dignity looks like. I took the dish from him, smiled, and said, You helped me remember. That was the start. He leaned against the counter. So what's next? Next? I grinned. I'm going on tour. He blinked. Wait. What? I chuckled. The publishing house wants me to speak at 3 events this winter. They say readers want to meet me. Older women, young professionals, caregivers, even students. They want to hear from someone who chose herself after a lifetime of choosing others. Jeremy hooped. Grandma, you're going to be a rock star. I already am, I said, winking. 2 months later, I stood on a stage in a college auditorium, microphone in hand, staring at hundreds of faces. Many young, some not. I told them the story. The kitchen. The pie. The name I was called. The boy who walked in with legal documents. And the woman who rose from it all. Afterward, a young girl, maybe 19, came up to me crying. My grandmother raised me, she said. She died last year. And I never thanked her. I never saw her as a full person. Just the one who did the dishes. The one who ironed my school uniforms. I took her hand. She loved you. That was her gift. She nodded. But I want to be different. I want to see people now. Especially the ones who go unseen. I smiled. Then that's how her legacy lives on. On the flight home, I wrote a final entry in the notebook Jeremy had given me, the one with a leather cover and the words, Your story matters, embossed in gold. Dear Margaret, you made it. You stood when they sat. You spoke when they silenced. You forgave, but did not forget. You returned to yourself. And you discovered at last that you were never the maid. You were the architect, the foundation, the heart of the home. You didn't just reclaim your place. You taught others how to find theirs. Back home, as snow fell gently again over the garden, I made tea and sat in my favorite chair, the one Jeremy restored with fresh upholstery and new legs. I watched the light dance across the hardwood floors, listened to the ticking of the old clock, and smiled. This house, my house, wasn't just standing. It was alive. And so was I.